Welcome to the Behavioral View. Hey everyone, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we'll tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over. Hi everyone and welcome to the Behavioral View. I am Shannon Hill, the Editor-in-Chief at CentralReach Institute, and I'm here with a lot of people today, so I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves. Carrie, you want to go first? Milico? We have 2 Carries.
Say which one, because now we actually have 2 today. Yeah. I'm Carrie Millico. I'm the Director of Clinical Programming at CentralReach and a co-host of our program.
And I'm Nissa Van Etten, the Manager of Assessment and Clinical Training here at CentralReach.
Great. And our guests today are all from BST, Behavior Science Technologies. Starting with Trisha Glick. Would you like to say hello and a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Trisha Glick. I am the founder and CEO of Behavior Science Technology. Been in the field of behavioral health for about 25 years, and I am a BCBA and former owner of an ABA service organization.
Great. And with you today are Carrie and Abby. Am I going to say Abby or Abigail? Let's just get this clear right from the beginning.
You could say Abby.
Okay. Carrie and Abby. So you guys want to say a little bit about who you are as well?
Sure. Abby, do you want to go?
Sure. My name is Abigail Blackman, or Abby, and I'm the Director of Customer Success at Behavior Science Technology. So I work with new users to onboard them to the platform and meet with organizational leaders to review usage data. I am a behavior analyst and have experience working directly with clients of services, but my training is in organizational behavior management, so more experience working with organizations at the training and performance management levels.
Great. Okay.
And I'm Carrie Ann Condi, and I'm a BCBA-D and New York State licensed behavior analyst. I am a co-founder of Behavior Science Technology and currently serve as a clinical advisor. And then I'm also an assistant teaching professor at St. Joseph's University, New York, and the social media coordinator for the Association for Science and Autism Treatment.
Great. Thank you, guys. And so you introduced yourself as Carrie Ann. So is it all right if I say Carrie Ann just to differentiate between Carrie Ann and Carrie Millicup?
Yes.
Okay. Fabulous. Well, we brought you here today to talk about using measures in management purposes, for management purposes. But we thought we would kick off with something fun and light to begin with, and maybe you can tell us about how this management process went for you. We want to know, what was everyone's very first job? Who has a good one? No one has.
I don't know if it's good. I mean, babysitter was obviously the first one for me. I was the oldest in my neighborhood and had some regulars and nannied for summers and stuff like that. But outside of a job that the IRS actually recognized was that in high school I worked at the snack bar at the country club. That was my thing, and then got promoted to inside. So that was
the air conditioning.
I thought it was hot in Florida.
Always an achiever right from the beginning.
Yeah. I just wanted that AC, Too hot.
What about you, Carrie Ann? What were you doing?
Yeah, so I started babysitting at a young age. I don't know how. At 11, I was babysitting kids.
Great. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I was saying I made $3.50 an hour back in the day. It was great.
Yeah, I did some babysitting I was doing it a few years before you, decades before you. So apparently the rate didn't go up because I think I was getting $3 an hour as a 10, 11, 12-year-old. It was the 70s and early 80s. So yeah, nobody cared about how young you were watching their children. But my first like paid job where you had an assigned schedule and you needed to show up was bagging and delivering ice. This was a family business. Yeah. Which sounds like a great job for the summer because, it's ice. But having 8 and 10 pound bags of ice hurled at you by your uncle who's only like 10 or 15 years older than you and thinks it's funny to watch you grab like that. Not so fun, really. I earned that money. Trish, what were you doing?
Well, I had actually a really fun job off the books at first when I was really little. So I think same thing. Instead of babysitting, I lived in a beach community, which was really unusual in Brooklyn, New York. People wouldn't think that. But I loved working similar to Carrie at the snack counter. But I think I probably was paid in ices and Swedish fish. So I think I got a couple of bucks thrown at me at the end of the day, but I thought it was the greatest thing in the planet. So while I was at the beach, I was able to just hop behind the snack bar and stir up some Italian ices and give out candy to like the kids that were probably just a couple of years younger than me. My first official job was in high school as a cashier. And I have to say, before there were scanners, and the way that cashiers have it easy now.
You have to memorize all the codes of like cilantro is 9756 and
yeah, exactly. Yep, all the produce codes and ringing up everything and remembering pricing and all that, and then also at the end of the day restocking the shelves, all that fun stuff.
My grandparents had one of those little country grocery stores, and there was no codes. It was punching it in on the old cash register.
Yeah.
Mental math. I'm good with that.
Making change. I can do it like that.
Nissa, what were you doing?
I also started out babysitting at the age of 8. Just the neighborhood kids. I lived in a cul-de-sac, and I was the one, when the parents hung out in the cul-de-sac, I would go in and help them get to bed. I don't think I was paid much. I think it was more of like fruit snacks and fruit and whatever they had in their kitchen. But my first real job in high school was at the Sizzler. And
Sizzler!
Love it.
And it was always at the cashier, would you like all you can eat with that meal? Would you like that?
I mean, I guess I worked a lot through life because I'm relating to everyone. I worked at Golden Corral.
Oh, awesome.
Same concept. Yep. And I did learn that having a ponytail really increased tips. So that's
interesting.
All right, Abby, you can wind us up. What was your first job?
Yeah, so most closely to what you guys were just talking about, I worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken. So
did you go smelling like chicken a lot?
Oh yes.
Grease. Oh yes. I'm sure it smelled more like grease. Oil.
Yeah, and it never comes out of the clothes either. So, but yeah, it was a good job, I guess, to start. And similar to what Trisha was saying, I got really good at remembering how much to add for tax and having to punch those different things into the register. So it was fun.
Customer service. We learn a lot about it in those jobs too, right?
Did everyone have like a waitress job at some point in their life?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
Everyone but Carrie Ann. Yeah. Like, I feel like that was such a good benefit of mine because now I know I'm like, oh no, like when you go out to dinner with some people and they're like, I don't want that table. I want that table. I'm like, no. There's system. Now you just bring up your whole system. And now you're going to get spit in your food. Or it's like when you stack the plates for the server to come and get them, like, and then they come by like, oh, you used to serve, didn't you?
If they have the up the arm thing down
to
the science, And
Oh,
they're a
Texas
pro.
Roadhouse, and it was
Yes.
steak and ribs, and I had 3 on one end, and then they would come and load me up with 2 on the other.
You need to be tipping those people even more, because that takes some effort to learn that skill.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, let's kind of launch into the real reason we're here today, and that is to talk about measurement in performance. And I guess I kind of just want to lob it out there. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about things that everybody already knows. So we are going to just jump into this with the assumption that we agree that within our field of behavior analysis, we don't necessarily use our science very readily in how we work and supervise and manage the people who are working for us. Can we just take that as a given and launch from there?
I think on multiple times on this podcast, we've like quoted that thing of like, if you ever want to see a behavior analyst be mentalists, talk to them about like their employees or something like that.
Teams. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep, for sure. So why is that? What are the barriers? Why are we not doing it, even though we know better? Yeah. And this is one of those places where Karen's it looked like nobody did that to me. You all immediately started.
I would say that one aspect is like, it's for people who maybe not have that explicit training. It's just like an extra add-on on their work that they have to do. Is like, okay, now I have to create the system. Now I have to create this, and it may not come so naturally to them, or they have multiple hats that they're wearing, which is a lot of ABA agencies, right? And so it's just like essentially taking on a whole, like multiple cases. If you're like, okay, well now I have to have data for this person and track this and doing that, I can see people just being overwhelmed and feel like that they don't have the bandwidth to take that on.
Yeah.
Well, and I think if the contingency isn't in place, like if the space hasn't been created yet for the supervisors to collect data on their teammates that they're supervising, there's no reason for them to do it.
Yeah.
It's like anything with behavior, if they're not explicitly told, like, do this, and then the consequence afterwards to maintain that. There's
like
no reason
agencies
to
have to do so many certain things for to get insurance reimbursement, but none of that is with regards to like reporting data on their staff or anything like that, right? There's no sort of like agency that they're reporting to saying like, oh, well, these are the because if not, then you don't get whatever this is over here, right? So yeah.
I think it also even starts earlier on, like in the beginning of our training, depending on the university that we go to, depending on this type of supervision that we get. So I think that from my experience, and it was 100 years ago, but my supervision and training was focused on me as a clinician providing services, but not managing a team. So that was something that I had to learn outside of, my formal training. And through initially, some of my supervisors really didn't focus on helping me be a good supervisor. And so I never put 2 and 2 together. There was really no connection that, to manage my team, that I'd be using the same skills that I am to, create programs or evaluate, how programs are going for learners and the folks that I served. So I think there's this, really big, unfortunate gap in our skills when we're, right out the gates. I think there's a lot, thankfully, going on more recently where people are acknowledging that and looking to make change.
There's so many jumping off points in that conversation, but I want to kind of go a little bit broad in what I'm going to say next and just sample you guys on what you think about this. It seems like we sometimes turn on and turn off our behavior analytic thinking style, right? I think about behavior analysis and my approach to behavior analysis when I'm working with clients, but do I use behavior analysis as my worldview and how I look at everything that's going on around me? And that's not a judging. I don't mean that to sound like judgment at all. I don't necessarily know that it's necessarily required that people do that, but I do, and I think that makes it harder for me not to be judgy sometimes, because and not to say that I've been a perfect manager.
You
I have
do
definitely
turn it
not.
on or off, or are you saying you don't turn it on?
No,
Yeah.
no. I feel like behavior analysis is infused into the way I look at everything. I would say that I was as a supervisor when I was doing it, I have been sloppy on the measurement side of it, but it's not because I didn't think that that's the way I was supposed to do it. It was because of, response effort, 100% response effort stuff. But I'm curious because I'm not coming up through behavior analytic training programs after they have blossomed, right? So are those training programs focusing on teaching people to think behavior analytically across the board, or do they get the message that this is what you do in a session with a client?
Secret word number 1, technology.
I think it's dependent on the school as always, but I, for my master's and PhD, went to 2 different universities and got very different training at those. And the focus was different as well. So more so in my master's program, it was giving you the skills to work directly with clients, which makes sense, right? Because that's a terminal master's degree focus. Whereas in the PhD program, it was much more like what you're talking about, Shannon, of being a behavior analyst through and through and thinking about everything through that worldview. And so I think that it's entirely dependent on the school and kind of the terminal degree that somebody is working towards in that regard. But I'm with you that I thought about this in terms of a skill versus motivation deficit. And I think both are issues depending on where you're at with the organization and who you're working for.
Completely agree.
I think I agree with Abby in that it can also be the organizational structure. So you as a behavior analyst might have a goal for how you supervise and provide that type of support to your staff. But if you don't have support from the organization in terms of checklists and data management and reporting, or even that time to discuss that after a session, and you've got to run to the next supervision, and your organization doesn't provide that time, then I think that is a barrier to being successful in supervision and even submitting those checklists. And, oftentimes that is done after the fact via an email. And as most BCBAs are busy, they're traveling home, they're traveling from an in-home session, from a clinic, and taking that time would be off the clock to communicate, this is what I saw during session, here's what I'd like to see next time. So I think if the organization doesn't have that set up, you're setting up your staff to not provide those types of reports.
Completely agree.
I also think something interesting in my experience was that I had this misconception that OBM and performance management were like something different, not, and when I started to take courses on it, I was like, wait a second, like this is the same as this is behavior analysis. And so I do in our positions now, we get a lot of folks who want to gain experience in OBM and, look for opportunities with us. And so it's interesting to kind of understand, that there is this broad misconception that that OBM and PM are some mysterious part of behavior analysis that is not, 100% tied to what we do and what we know and what we've learned. Of course, there are nuances, there are, differences, but fundamentally it's the behavior analytic, principles and methods just used in a different environment and with different people. So I found that to be interesting in my experience.
Yeah, the complexity of people who, and we've talked about this many times too on other episodes, is that as the client, in our case the employee, becomes more cognitively complex, right? How do we apply the concepts? So you guys talk to a lot of folks who are struggling in this area, I assume. So I think you're probably the experts. What kinds of things can, if it is an issue of response cost and of support from the organization and systems not being in place, what are some things that from a management level we can do to support that clinical supervisor or whoever is trying to actually switch and become more data-based in the management?
That's a great question. I think I often think about if organizations had the time, money, and resources to just pause for a couple of months and put those systems in place, that would be the best, because it, like Nissa was saying, like it takes time to develop those. But what we've found in our discussions and the organizations we work with who have the most success is where like clinical directors and at the C-suite level, where they reserve time in their BCBA schedule to focus on this. So whether that's creating their observation system, whether that's providing performance feedback, and they're really advocating and talking about the importance of developing the skill sets of their employees, and it's not kind of just on the back burner for them to do later on. But like we said, and we know that our field's in a tough place right now, not every organization is able to do that for their clinicians.
And I've sorry, Carrie, we're going to say something. Well, and I've met a lot of behavior analysts who have this all or nothing mentality, where they have to have this huge system now that they put in place. And and then it's like, let's start small, which I know can be a real struggle for a lot of people, because again, we want to just make everything good and perfect right now in this moment. And so I think that if we just take a step back, and even for one program a week, one client a week, I mean, really just start small. Just put 5 minutes on your calendar to say, this week I'm going to do, a treatment integrity check on this particular program, and just make a sheet for that particular program that you can also then reuse for other, Skill Act programs. So I think we have to just remind ourselves it doesn't have to be perfect right now. It's work in progress.
My friend Kelly Ferris once said that years ago, and that has been like kind of my self mantra, because my default is perfect system, perfect program for my learner, perfect system for my company, perfect curriculum, like whatever it is. That is my default, but I have to do not let perfection impede progress, right? And so having to like that iterative or incremental type of plan to get there, because if you don't start small, like we've all mentioned in the first half hour of this recording, that it's daunting to take this on, especially if you're not being reimbursed for it. Reimbursement rates are already low, and that wiggle room of margin of overhead costs, to compensate for the time to create and to live in this system is also hard. Molly Dubuque, who is a VP of some really awesome stuff, VP of like data and analytics. That's the incorrect title for her, but it's at Little Star ABA. She presented data about how investing in their, and they called it something different, but it's just kind of like an internship for people to become supervisors and BCBAs and stuff like that. They have like this like kind of internship program. To do that, actually, they found a return on their investment with respect to client progress and retention of staff. And given that we're all living in this great resignation period, and that staff turnover, even before that happened at the RBT level, was about 60%, I think we would look to like, okay, how can we keep talent? Because right now our culture is not fighting for clients, it's fighting for talent, right? Fighting for staff. So I think it'd be really great if we had like her data and other people get data around this as saying like, hey, organizations, I understand that carving out time for this is really a struggle. Look at these data. You will get a return on the investment. It's going to be a bit of a lift at the onset, but look at all these things that how much money do companies waste with respect to like onboarding again and again and again, because staff only last for a few months.
Yeah. Actually, it's so interesting that you bring that up, because we have been talking with folks and presenting, some webinars on what we developed as an employee lifetime value calculator, and to help organizations understand what the true cost of turnover is, because I know there's been data initially put out where it's, on the average, like $5,000 an employee for turnover is kind of like this, initial look at that as from a data perspective. But we're finding that, like you're mentioning, Molly's organization, how they're investing in this internship program. Almost all organizations are. And so you have to even include the time frame that the person is within these programs. And we've come, in our analysis of it, we've come to learn that a person in, whether they're a BT level or a behavior or BCBA level, that the company doesn't make money, or they're not profitable on that particular employee or staff member until they're with the organization for 18 months. And on average, organizations are losing people within the first, 90 days to 6 months. And so it's like a revolving door. So obviously these organizations are bleeding money. And I think another thing, to your point, Carrie, is that what we're also seeing is that, and I think it kind of, speaks to everybody's points about, even we were talking about this earlier, is that organizations aren't requiring this. So yes, there's the BCBA making time, the supervisor making time, but the burden can't be on the BCBA supervisor's shoulders. This is another contribution to burnout, in my opinion. It needs to go up the ladder in the organization, and so it needs to be mandated. We usually typically don't do what's not mandated, whether it's a payer mandating it. That's usually what drives the C-suite folks and executives to decide what they mandate. But I think they're just missing the opportunity to have access to this data at that org-wide level to help them. And I love this example of Molly and Little Star. That's kind of the prototype, I would say, for what should be being done, across the board in our industry. And unfortunately, so many organizations, they're not including performance metrics or staff skills as like a KPI, as something that's, the organization is aligned with. So I think it's a critical oversight that's like impacting us industry wide, unfortunately, not even just, at the individual level.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for a large service organization several years ago now. I was going to say a few years ago, but it was more than that. And I know, like, even as important as I know that treatment integrity is, if they hadn't put it as a requirement as part of our performance matrix, I probably wouldn't have done it. I'll admit it, because, you want to do such a good job with your clients that then thinking about your teammates that you're responsible for, it was, they can easily become an afterthought because you're just so hyper-focused on clinical outcomes. And so I'm just thankful that the organization that I was a part of, required us to collect that data. The scores were attached to us and, our performance. And it was just nice that we had that support and we had those data sheets available to us. And
was it like the Abernathy's scorecards, the TPS report, stuff like that? Yeah, you guys use it. Yeah, we learned about that in school too, and we use them in our organization. Are you all familiar with the 6 boxes, Carl Binder's 6 boxes performance management system? One thing that they teach in that setup is that, like, if you link all of the outputs that are generated from staff at any level to agreed upon business results of the organization, then you actually get that enrollment of, I'm not just this random cog in the wheel. Like how does me turning in my time card on time help them? If you can tie that on the scorecard, say this is how we're measuring it, and this is why, right? Like, this is the valuable reason of how it helps the organization as a whole. then they feel like everyone's enrolled in the health and wellness of the organization, and that even turning in your timesheet on time or whatever it is, something so menial, can they now know the like greater implications of that as a whole system, and that helps to manage performance. And I love this when you're like, okay, so here's your outputs, but even more than that, this is why they're here, and this is why we're measuring those things.
How do you get that message out in a way that doesn't turn into a joke? Just talking real world stuff here. That is a concept that has spread into generic HR, right? In that when you do your performance appraisals, then you set your goals and you link them back to the organizational goals. But honestly, I've talked to a lot of employees afterwards, and Ben, and one of these employees is like, yeah, they really stretch to link what I'm doing to what the big goals are. So, for people who may be not going to become experts in OBM, but want to infuse this in some way, how do you message that correctly so that it doesn't become a joke?
Yeah. I would also question like what those big goals are, because there's goals, but then there's business results, and those are different, right? So, I would also say like, are those actual business results? Because those should be like pretty obvious on how that behavior links to that.
Secret word number 2, goals.
Yeah, I think based off of what we recommend to people to measure is what Trisha was talking about before, is making those things your key performance indicators. And if you have to change those to make sure that whatever outcomes you're looking for at each of the different levels can be tied to those actual goals, I think reviewing that is important when setting up what the evaluation process is.
Yeah, I was just going to say in our system, we've basically broken it down to 3 key metrics, and it's clear clinical skills, obviously your technical skills, and then we look at professionalism, so that's your soft skills, and for BCBAs, we also have evaluation tools for measuring leadership skills and things like that, and then we also look at environmental barriers. I think that's one of the one metrics that's super interesting to see not many people focus on, and yet it's the easiest to change, your environments rather than change the behavior of your staff. It takes a little bit more effort usually. Sometimes those are the 3, key areas that we take a look at, and we recommend, as far as being part of the full, provider skill set.
I love that you guys include environmental barriers, because I think that is such a huge thing that I think sometimes staff, like maybe like a middle management or something like that, they feel, and they can probably tell you every single one of those environmental barriers, but leadership may not recognize all of those. I used to consult with Shane Isley, and I consulted on a case, and this middle manager was like, yeah, no, I do want to do this, but I can't because this and this and this and this and this. And we were like, oh yeah, no, those are real. Yeah, I can see how there's no way that you're going to be able to do this part of your job because this part of your job is all consuming. Or even just like the scheduler. Like there was like, if you have 5 different ways in which you're scheduling and it's running amok, is becoming impossible then for maybe the RBTs to feel like that they have like a set schedule and security and knowing what's going on for that day. And then that can influence employee satisfaction. It can influence customer satisfaction, because mom's like, who is this person? I've never seen them before in my life. Do they know what they're doing with my kid? Like the trickle down of it is just really significant, and it's all based on like, yeah, you just got to clean that up a little bit. You got to use this system, or why are you having 3 people do one person's job, or you just need to not be clinical and you need to do all administrative work, right?
Yeah. And we find it comes down to visibility. I think that's your point, Carrie, is that, really it's just being aware of these things. There's so much going on in the realm of things in the day-to-day, running an ABA business. And I think that just having visibility to some of this and bringing it to the attention to folks who have decision-making power and can make change is critical. It's really, I always use the example in my old service organization where we were providing in-home services, and so we had schedulers, just like you're mentioning, and so we had technicians that just logistically and physically could not get from one person's home to the next. Long Island traffic is crazy, and usually services are after school in that key, rush hour time and whatnot. Yeah. And so, of course, like you said too, it affects parents like, well, why is the next parent, that the BT is trying to get to, why is this person always showing up late? And the BT is probably just trying to do the best that they can. If they don't bring that to the attention to the supervisor, or even if it is brought to the attention of the supervisor, but the supervisor has no supervisory, or managerial control, so to speak, over the scheduler, then there's just this whole, dysfunction within the systems and the processes. So yeah, it is. We find it to be, that it's very important, that component, as well.
If we, I'm thinking about our audience, and probably the people watching this are that middle level person, right? The clinician who wants to do a better job as a supervisor, but doesn't have the backing to take the pause and to set up the system and to spend the non-billable hours. If you guys can give some advice to that person, how do they have some success in pitching that to the decision makers?
Yeah, I think that's the trickiest part. That's the I think most where the frustration levels are so high at this point within most organizations where we are speaking with. I think that folks have to be persistent, and I think I always feel arming myself with data helps, because most folks, whether they're behavior analysts or not, most folks at the executive leadership level can appreciate data. If you're an organization that's backed by a private equity firm, they love data. So those are things that are helpful as well. I think that's it's a tricky thing, because there has to be alignment. There has to be the upper management, so to speak, has to find value in what you're bringing to them.
Exactly. So if
that work, but the data that they want is maybe different than what.
That's why you have to have those business results. If the organization has claimed, these are it's not the whole laundry list, but you got to pick. These are our top 5 business results, right? If it's, obviously there's going to be some revenue or cash flow or something, right? We need to stay alive. Is it customer satisfaction? Is it employee retention? Is it reputation in the community? What are these organization results? And then the middle manager is just saying, we don't have this system. You then, as Tricia said, collect data, say how can this movement towards what I feel is valuable, but maybe leadership doesn't. How can I show them that this is valuable? Because it's going to match to some of those organizational business results, and say listen, okay, so we have data that suggests that if we do this type of mentorship program, then it'll increase retention, and that links up to employee satisfaction, that links up to revenue, and they can map it to all those things. You have to bring it into what the leadership has already determined to be the goals of those results, what everything is building towards, and then you can say and here's how that is.
Yeah,
I think thinking about just even RBT turnover. Let's say you're managing a case of 7 to 8 clients and you've lost 4 of your team members across those clients. It's affecting your ability to schedule those hours, make sure that goals are being met for a client. So if you're only looking at your caseload and what you can report to your own manager, you could bring some of that information in, saying, we've lost this many hours across these clients because I've lost my RBT staff. So if we're not investing in these staff, I'm then training someone new. Parents are frustrated. We're not making progress on goals. If what they can manage is within their own caseload, that can be reported up. to see if there's further discussion.
And then their supervisor can do some like aggregate data work around that to then report it to leadership and say like, look, here's where we are, like, this is consuming resources of time and money and labor. And so as such, then these are functioning as barriers right now, how we're operating to these business results that we've identified. If we make this tweak here and here and here, then it actually allows us to move towards those business results that we've already identified, as opposed to moving away from them.
I think another reason, I think equipping them with the skills and the data to be able to have those conversations is important. But I think another barrier is that people struggle to have those difficult conversations. And when they're met with resistance over and over again, it's punishing. And so if we can, as a field, figure out ways to, be more effective communicators, and how to provide that sort of feedback and advocate for what we need, I think that would be better off. And I know some, recent research is coming out in terms of those teaching those complex skills to BCBA level folks. But I just feel like we're not there yet, and enough people don't feel comfortable communicating those difficult things.
And I wouldn't want to just put the onus on the person who's trying to relay the information. I think a lot of it also comes to the listeners, right? Like
the culture too, right?
Exactly. Is
having an open door.
Yeah. And so it's like, oh, I'm receiving feedback says, as someone who owns organizations and stuff like that. And the minute someone tells you is like, hey, this isn't working, you're like, well, I built that system. Of course it's working, So there's a moment where you have to like be a little humble, hear what they're saying, identify those parts, right? And I don't know if you all have read this book, but I mention this book all the time, but Radical Candor by Kim Scott is amazing and leads you into creating a culture where people are giving and receiving feedback and actually soliciting for it, top down. Hey, how can I be a better leader for you? What can I do to make your job better or make you better at your job? How can I change what I'm doing? What do you need more of or less of from me? And I think that you're right, if we actually create a culture around that, whereas we say we like that because feedback is in all of our research and stuff, but we also have that behavior analyst pride that like butts heads with that. So it is completely like a culture shift.
I'd also, go ahead.
Yeah, and speaking.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'd also like to, bring it to what I think needs to be happening more in the conversation is behavior analysts really talking and focusing on provider skill and how they're evaluating that, and the metrics that they're able to bring to the to their supervisors for that conversation, and tying it. I think this is the key, is tying it to outcomes, because I think that's there's all the ideal situations that we hope will change, but today outcomes is a key metric that most folks and organizations are looking at, because the payers are asking for those metrics. So but I think there is this tremendous disconnect that going back to high turnover, shortage of workforce, that's where the problem stems, like Carrie mentioned earlier. And I think that there's this unusual disconnect where I hate to, kind of make this separation, but we talk often about like there's the business folks versus the, clinical folks. And the clinical folks understand, I think, and realize the importance of knowing where what levels your providers are, your skill levels are, and your entire workforce, not just the individuals on your team, and looking at that as at an organizational level, how important it is to know. It influences so many things. I mean, it influences your margins in a perspective of what kind of trainings and are, and development and professional supports you're providing, your hiring needs. It just influences so much stuff. And ultimately, all of that leads to your outcomes and the quality of your services. I think we're blessed to have Florence DeGennaro-Reed as an advisor on our team, and Abby is former student of hers, and just, she spent over a decade of research on talking about how provider performance and treatment integrity scores, directly correlate with clinical outcomes. So I think that could be a nice intro to the conversation, because it's something that we have access to today, and it's something that leadership and organization owners are already currently looking at. So I think that could be, a great starting point.
I really hope that I love that. And I'm going to be the pessimist here in saying that I think outcomes being the driver for organizations is when there's a clinician in your C line making those decisions. I think when you have someone who is looking at purely financials and the business structure and stuff like that, they're like, well, it doesn't matter because I have a waiting list for, right? I really hope that, I don't think that that's everyone who isn't a BCBA by any means. I think people have the best intent, but those people do exist. We've seen companies that are like that, right? And it's whereas for that business to survive, they're not dependent on learner success, right? They're dependent on the machine functioning in that people are, right? We're doing billable hours and we're, billing insurance coming, we're getting money back. It would be great, because then that means we're driving towards quality if the business health was attached to outcomes, which is probably where we're leading to for value-based care. But right now, as is, it's oh, did you clock in the time? Cool, because then we can, it's, I don't necessarily think that is a driver for all of the decision makers in all of the companies in ABA.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's driven by, again, the payers requesting it. I think if, like you said, if payers request it, then yes, it's a driver. If otherwise, like you said, organizations that have long waiting lists and no one's complaining, and, parents are just happy that someone's helping their kid, and patient satisfaction surveys are, seemingly good and also indicating that there's no problems. And I think these are all false indicators of success. They're driving this vicious cycle. And we've had conversations where outcomes and patient satisfaction are not to get too businessy, but lagging indicators, where you're really leaving those to chance if you're not looking at things like provider skill and how many folks you have at what level of skill within your workforce. If you're an organization and over 50% of your workforce are behavior technicians that literally just came off the streets, that is not going to, eventually it's going to catch up where that's your outcomes are then not going to be what you're expecting or hoping them if you don't do something, and how great from a proactive approach.
Yeah. How great would it be to advertise and say look, whatever metric it was, these are the people that work here and these are their metrics. This is how skilled they are. This is where you want to come. Whereas right now the demand is so great that people are yeah, no, I haven't heard great things, but they're the only place they can get me in. So we'll do that for the time being. And then we'll be on the wait list for this, but God, it could take 2 years, So, and that corporation is no, we don't need top-notch staff. They just came off. They did the online training without any, it was just, without supplement, it just goes, and then they still exist. But yeah, if we can create more of a need and a shift and a focus on that quality and, bringing in accreditation in there and, stuff like that, then hopefully we'll create more of a well-informed consumer base that knows what to look for when searching out agencies. But right now they're just oh, that's what you do? Cool.
Secret word number 3, Performance.
One other thing I'm just going to throw in there is to see what you guys think before we would start winding down. If you are introducing a system into a culture where there is no existing system, then it's filling a gap and people embrace it. But when we bring in performance management, we are also in some ways challenging the existing HR department. And Trish, I bring this up, I think, every time I talk to you. So is there a world in which these two things coexist? Does one have to replace the other? How can that work?
Sure. I know we've talked about this several times, but so I believe obviously there is a need for both. They, HR and performance management have to coexist. I think that, from an HR perspective, the focus should be on, or usually is, on compliance, whereas from an organizational behavior management or a behavior analytic perspective on performance management is the focus should be on quality and helping folks move and succeed and progress, and develop. And I think that's where they can coexist. Customers that use our software typically use the metrics that they gain within the software to inform their reviews. So, obviously we recommend quarterly reviews versus annual. I think nowadays there's so much research out there that, talks about how annual is not enough. And I think most organizations get that. There's very few. I mean, although we do speak to some who are not doing any reviews at all or any kind of feedback, mechanism. So there are, there's always the exceptions. But I think in general, the best case scenario is to be able to evaluate the performance of your team and your staff and be able to do that objectively. So not using scales and surveys, but being able to incorporate, especially in our field, the observation piece, the supervisors in real time observing the performance and then other obvious, assessments and evaluation tools, and derived from that is an actual objective metric, and then that put into a performance review. And I think this goes back to, I think, Carrie, you were mentioning something earlier as far as reviews not being meaningful, or maybe I think, and Shannon, you also mentioned, as far as the metrics then are going to be so tied to what the actual work is that that our staff are providing, it just becomes so much more meaningful and actionable. I think when you go through the motions of a standard performance evaluation where the questions are very subjective, and I've been there, done that. I was actually a 1099 consultant, and they said, well, we're going to do a review with you. And I was like, wait, what? First of all, that's not how it works as a 1099. And second of all, I don't have a supervisor because I'm an independent contractor. But I had a person from the organization sit down with me and go through this laundry list of things that she thought I did or didn't do. And I was like, well, you haven't asked me, you haven't observed me. And I'm like, okay, and it didn't affect anything. It didn't affect my pay. It didn't affect anything with it. So I was like, this is just meaningless and going through the motions, and it's a check the checkbox, so I think when you do that, and this is part of, ties right back into the culture of the organization, this is where you just, people check out, that's not meaningful. It's going through the motions. It's not, helpful in making people feel like there is something, that you're invested in. Or I shouldn't say something, but it I think leaves people not feeling like the organization is invested in them, as part of the culture.
Yeah, because when you're just going through the motions, the person knows you're just going
Absolutely.
through the motions, right? Same. I want to give you guys the last 5 minutes to just talk about BST, what it is, and how it can help.
I'll just kick it off by saying that so basically we developed a clinical operations software that focuses on the performance of your clinical teams, and it's geared towards the exact work that we do in the ABA and autism services. I don't know if Abby or Carrie, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, sure. So in the system, we've digitized, if you will, the ability to collect the data that we've been talking about, the importance of taking this whole time, and the data aggregated across teams. And so it provides that visibility to BCBAs and organizational leaders so that they can see how each member on their team is performing, and then hopefully use that in their supervision practice to make actionable change at improving integrity, because we know that it impacts clinical outcomes. And something that's really neat, and I'll just use a case example, is that I analyze the data in my role, because I love data. I geek out about it every day. And I noticed that one organization was performing around 50% integrity across all of their clinicians, and that's alarming, right? And so just them having that visibility and having a conversation with them, within a quarter, their integrity was about 92%. And so they were able to use those data in order to enact change at their organization, and they've since had more staff stay with them. And so that's, I know, just an N of one that I have to share with you, but it really does provide the visibility into having those performance data that we've been stressing the importance of this whole talk, really.
And if I can just speak to the system too, we have tons of skill acquisition treatment integrity forms, and they were created, like I say, to be as generic as possible, but also to be as specific as possible, to cover a wide variety of programs, and it's very user friendly. So it's like a one-stop shop. Have it on your phone, tablet, laptop.
Sounds like you guys are doing a lot in the way of reducing response effort.
Yeah. And one of the other really cool pieces of feedback that we've gotten from customers is, and Abby mentions, it's definitely a focusing on being a supervisor and leadership tool, but the behavior technicians also, it gives them more opportunities, or increased opportunities, I should say, for feedback and reinforcement. And that's the number one piece of feedback that we've gotten from our customers, which just makes my heart sing, because I feel like that's where, we don't focus as much and invest in much in our RBTs, because unfortunately there's this, thought of that it's just, can be like a revolving door. And to me, to elevate their experience and get them excited about their development and ABA as a career, I think is just instrumental to the industry. And so the number one piece of feedback is RBTs love, or that we get, is RBTs love feedback themselves. So they like to have the access to their metrics and see where their skills are and what they still need to work on.
Love it. Well, it is such a huge part of what behavior analysts do, despite what, they may be focused mostly on developing those clinical skills in school, and then you get them out of school and you realize, oh, wait, my job is really this, not that. So it's wonderful that you guys are trying to help this problem. So we appreciate that, and we appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. I feel like we could probably go for a couple more hours, but I didn't reserve that much time with you. So we'll just say thank you. And thanks, everyone, for joining us on the Behavioral View. Stay tuned for information on how to get your CEU. And we look forward to seeing you guys.
Thank you for having us.
Episode. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Behavioral View. To get your CEU, follow the link in the instructions below. You can then go to the attendance verification quiz, where you'll enter in the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate. If you've already done the work, you may as well get the credit.